Steel yourself. The government is now the boss of British Steel. Is it back to the future? Could full nationalisation of the industry be on the way? Well, the new gaffer of British Steel is here, otherwise known as the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, and with him, his opposite number, Andrew Griffith from the Conservatives. It's been a momentous 24 hours, hasn't it?
It has been a significant
And
period.
Andrew, how do you see this?
Yeah, look, it's been a really big week, and a lot of people will be very uncertain, still wanting to know what the future looks like.
Okay, well, plenty for us to talk about with you two later in the programme. Nigel Farage is here too, the leader of Reform UK, who's arguing for the state to take full control now. His pal Donald Trump has told Russia to get moving on a ceasefire with Ukraine, but Russia tells us it won't be rushed.
We do not want a ceasefire for just to make it spectacular gesture, to show it publicly or for the media. We need full-scale settlement, once and forever.
Morning. Our team at the desk this week for the next hour. Gary Smith, head of the GMB union. Some of your members were on the site in Scunthorpe yesterday. Andy Street, Sir Andy Street now, the former Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, and before that the boss of John Lewis. And Stephanie Flanders, economic giant brain and journalist at Bloomberg. Welcome to you all. Let's start, as ever, by what's making the news this morning. And no surprise, government control of British Steel is splashed across plenty of the papers. The Sunday Times claims the Navy is on alert to escort fuel to the plant, but it carries another story with another link to China-UK relations. A Lib Dem MP, you can see her there on the front page, Vera Hobhouse, was barred from entering Hong Kong. We'll talk about that a bit later. The Observer has one of the images that Downing Street will love. The Prime Minister pictured alongside a steel worker in Scunthorpe. The Sunday Mirror brands what's happened, Ring of Steel. And the Sunday Telegraph has a different lead, though, one of the Manchester Arena bombers' attack on prison officers in Durham. But it too carries another picture from Scunthorpe, where workers and families were marching in the sun while MPs were deciding the fate of the company. It has then, Gary, we just heard from Jonathan Reynolds, really been a momentous 24 hours. Some of your members were on site yesterday. What was actually going on? Because some of the allegations about sabotage, accusations of all sorts of things happening, workers blocking the Chinese management from entering.
Yeah, our understanding, we actually spoke to government a couple of weeks ago because we were concerned that the Chinese owners were not going to bring the coke in, which was vital to keep the plant going. We were worried about industrial vandalism, and there was a worry about sabotage on the site, quite frankly. And yesterday, workers did prevent executives from the Chinese owners from going on site.
That's pretty high stakes.
It was, and I'm sure that people are still very worried about that. But these people performed heroics yesterday to ensure that we've got a fighting chance for the steel industry in this country.
But just to be clear, you're literally saying that some of your members and workers were blocking Chinese managers from coming into the plant physically?
I've not spoken to workers directly. I've seen the mixed reports in the press, but there was absolutely people on the site are furious at the Chinese owners, and they were legitimately concerned about industrial sabotage at the plant.
Andy, you've been a businessman and a politician, so you see this in different ways, really. Do you think this was the government's only option?
It looks like it, given where we got to by the end of the week. It's obviously the question of how on earth we got to this point that it's so last minute. Mm-hmm. But if you say to me, did we have to maintain this plant? The answer is yes. And if this was the only way of doing it, then it was the right thing to do. Just one thought, though. That's a story that we've just heard from Gary about sort of confrontation with the Chinese. Seems utterly illogical to me. If you were the Chinese plant, you would want to take probably a pound off the British government rather than have all the costs of the closure and the reputational damage. So I think that might have been right yesterday. But I would imagine a much more collaborative approach going forward.
Well, I'm sure that's what the government will be hoping for. Whether they get it, of course, is a different question. Stephanie, in terms of the economics of this, how big a deal is it for the government to step in and take over a big company with a big heritage?
There's obviously the sheer numbers involved, which are large, although they're not sort of unsurmountable. But I think, the real issue is, what this symbolises. We've had decades of learning an economic model that we were taught by Margaret Thatcher and successive governments, it doesn't matter where something's produced as long as we can get it. And when it's made here, it doesn't matter who owns that company. I think it sort of symbolises that both of those are now in question, but there's still a long-term policy that needs to come out of this that's not just about steel. It's about how do we try and get back the kind of energy infrastructure we need after 20 years of producing a situation where energy is much more expensive than it is in most other developed countries, and we don't produce enough of it. Was looking the other day, we have a third of the electricity generated per person of the US. A third. That just shouldn't be the case.
And energy costs, we know, have been a huge part of the difficulties for this industry and, of course, lots of other heavy industry too. We'll be back with you three a bit later on in the programme. So let's take you then to what was happening yesterday in Scunthorpe. People were on the streets yesterday. Relief for now for those workers and their families that the government has stepped in. But what on earth happens next? Generations of families have relied on the plant to make a living. So's the economy. But for a long time, steel has been a tough business. The industry has been out, then in, then out, and now it looks like back in the state's control.
Privatisation is on the move.
Well, let's talk then to the Business Secretary about what's next, because there are principles at stake here, but also some really pressing, urgent questions. You're the boss now. First of all, are you sure you will get the coal you need in time to keep the furnaces burning?
Well, the reason we took what I accept is a dramatic intervention yesterday to secure this country's economic security was to enable us to do that. I'm not going to comment on the very specifics of some of those commercial aspects of supply, but if we hadn't acted, the blast furnaces were gone. Steel production in the UK, primary steel producing, would have gone. So we've given ourselves the opportunity. We are in control of the site. My officials are on site right now to give us the chance to do that.
But you're saying you have the chance to do that. Taxpayers are now on the hook. So I'll ask you again, are you sure that you will have the supplies that you need to keep the furnaces burning?
I'm not going to get into the specifics of that for some very important reasons.
That's the central question, Secretary of State.
It is, but giving us the chance to do that was essential, and I'm not going to make my situation or the nation's situation more difficult by sharing some specific commercial aspects of that. But what we have done, with the support of parliamentary colleagues, and I hugely appreciate the presence in Parliament yesterday of so many colleagues to do that, was essential to maintaining steel production in the UK and giving us a chance for that transition to the future, which we need. I said in Parliament yesterday, it's not a magic wand, it's not a panacea, but without the decisive action by the government yesterday, all was lost.
But I've heard you say several times the phrase, it gives us a chance. So is it still a possibility then that the furnaces will go out and that this has now been for naught?
We've taken action to give us the chance to do that. The situation we have taken on is a challenging and difficult one. There are some particular commercial interests to take. You can ask me a lot of times and I won't tell you because I cannot tell you that information, but I can tell you that the action that we have taken has given us a chance to secure British steel, and without that action we would not have had the chance to do so.
So what happens then if these furnaces do go out?
Well, if we had not taken the decision to recall Parliament and take these powers and take control of British steel, that is exactly what would...
But this is now the question that everybody wants to know. You've taken charge. The taxpayers now on the hook for this. What happens then if these furnaces go out?
Well, that is the situation we've taken action to avoid. I'm just not going to say any more about the specifics of the supply to British steel. But I can tell you that we would have been in a situation where right now, what you'd be asking me this weekend is how are you going to support the thousands and thousands of people who have lost their jobs this weekend because the situation was beyond the control and the government didn't.
But everybody listening will hear you've used the phrase, it gives us a chance, I think, 4 times. And the implication of that is that we can't then, as taxpayers, be sure that what you've done is actually going to work. And the question then comes, as we've just heard from Gary Smith, the unions warned you 2 weeks ago that the Chinese were not necessarily bringing the coal in that they needed. If you look back over recent months, there have been many more warnings from the company, from people like the Mayor of Teesside, Ben Houchin, plenty of warnings to government that this situation was coming to a crunch. Might you end up looking like you irresponsibly let this go right down to the wire and in the end it failed?
No, because we've been monitoring the situation with raw materials so closely. That's why we were in a position to legally offer a way forward last week, which was that the British government would have supported the purchase of raw materials in a way which would have incurred no losses for the shareholder, Xingye, and actually even made that offer even more generous than that opening position. But it became clear to me and to the government that no financial offer of any generosity would have been accepted by the government. This was the situation on the 10th of April. On the Friday, we had agreement from the Cabinet. On Saturday, Parliament was recalled, and here we are on Sunday.
But it was at the 25th of March that British Steel made a statement in public saying that they might have to close the furnaces. Why did you let it get till this Thursday, when the coal's about to run out, that you actually made this decision?
Because I don't think in any job, in any role in government, you take emergency powers of the scale that happened yesterday until you have that emergency situation. We have been negotiating in good faith. We have been expecting, as I think is reasonable, an economically rational partner on the other side. When that became evident that that was not possible, that required the kind of significant, dramatic emergency action which was taken yesterday.
Do you think that there was sabotage?
I don't want to make what is already a fairly dramatic situation, more than it is. I think there were concerns about the gap, quite reasonable concerns, about the gap between the government indicating it was going to step in and take control and being in the control that I am in control of now on the site today. And the risk is, having made the decision, something happens. It might not be sabotage, it might be neglect. I mean, the conscious decision, not just to not order raw materials, but to sell existing supplies of raw materials, is the significant change that required the government to step in. So, of course, this is a difficult situation on site. I don't want to make that more dramatic than it was, but it was very important that we moved swiftly to take control.
But you have said that Xingye, the Chinese company, were not acting in good faith. So that implies that there was a deliberate intention for them to run down the plant and walk away.
Gary Smith has just articulated some of the tensions and loss of confidence on site, which I am very much aware of. I think the point is this. We understood, and it's been going on for years, how much money the shareholder was losing at British Steel. They wanted a transition to the future. That's what we were negotiating. I couldn't accept a position where we had no bridge to the future because of unilateral actions that would have irrevocably taken decisions, because people will know at home, once a blast furnace is off, it can't be brought back. That was the danger. I would expect to be able to make an offer that buys us the time to continue those negotiations. But I do believe there'd been a change of position at some point, which was for Xingye to keep the downstream mills, of which I think there is a sound business fundamentally. 95% of Network Rail's steel needs come from one of those 4 mills. To supply instead those plants from China, which would be a completely different decision altogether to a conversation about co-investment in new facilities and new production.
You've said on the record in the House of Commons it is likely that this company will be nationalised. Have you done an assessment of how much that would cost the taxpayer?
Well, the value of the company is zero. It has no market value in that sense. The need is for the taxpayer to stand behind the losses.
But to keep it running, to fund that transition that you've just described for Scunthorpe and the workers in Scunthorpe to have a future for their jobs, modernisation is absolutely necessary. We know the blast furnaces have probably got 5-6 years of life left in them. And we've talked to industry insiders about how much it might cost to modernise it. It might be 3, 4, 5 billion pounds. If this business is nationalised, is the Chancellor indicated to you that that money is going to be available? Well,
you would have heard me say in Parliament yesterday very clearly that our preference for a private sector partner to co-invest with is that the state could not or would not want to solely be behind the modernisation.
And it's pretty hard right now with sky-high energy costs, with all the uncertainty in the world economy, to imagine there's going to be people queuing up to invest. So again, and our
absolutely. But let's just on this point, Laura, right? If Germany and Holland and Sweden can have a steel industry, so can we, right? If you look at the amount of steel met by domestic demand in the UK, it's about 40%. It's about 80% in Europe. Even with all those issues of oversupply from China, 80% in Europe. So we can get the environment right. And don't forget, Steel is not a sunset industry. It's integral to the modern economy. And the kind of policies this government's pursuing, long-term investment in infrastructure, a building boom in housing, we're going to need steel for that. So there is a market there if we can get the environment right.
And that's still a big if. And while we're still seeing if you can answer that if, people want to know how much this might cost. And our viewers have been busy getting in touch about this. Chris Plum has told us, if we are to intervene and support the Scunthorpe plant, how much is it going to cost and how is it going to be funded? And Chris has also emailed us to say, don't stop asking until we get an answer.
OK, well, okay, so take the accounts for British Steel. The last set of accounts, the annual net losses were 233 million. Now, I think that can be improved upon, but let's take that figure, right? Now, I don't need any more borrowing to do that. We've got an allocation in the first budget the Chancellor made for a steel fund of over £2.5 billion. That's on top, by the way, of the 500 million going to Port Talbot for their modernisation plan. So there's no impact on borrowing or the fiscal rules. I would say to Chris, the decision we've taken, if we are spending some of that money to support, in the short term, British Steel, I think that is better for the taxpayer than spending a greater sum of money on a transition with a company I'm not sure right now I could rely on. Or, to be frank, what we could be talking about this weekend, which would have been the complete collapse of British Steel, with a cost to the exchequer, multiples, many multiples of supporting the company in the short term. If that had gone down, that number of jobs, the area response to land remediation, supporting those people who've lost their jobs, well over £1 billion.
So costs
easily.
wherever you look.
Absolutely.
Just before we move on, it's an old plant. The furnaces are near the end of their life. Have you got any concerns about the safety of the plant?
No, I don't have concerns about safety, partly thanks to the excellent workforce there and the British management that are in place. And I have sent some of my own people up previously before this change of control to make sure I'm comfortable in that regard. There had been decisions made by the shareholder in terms of the raw materials put in that took off one of the blast furnaces previously, and a whole range of problems that was brought under control by the professionalism of the workforce there. So I have had some in the past, but right now, no, I'm comfortable that we're in the right position there.
From the other side of this, if people work for a business, maybe a business that's important to the country, you've made the case, and Keir Starmer's made the case, that steel is a vital part of our economy and our infrastructure. But if you were sitting in a boardroom, might it not be a bit chilling to imagine that a politician could change the law in a single day and take control of your business?
Look, everything we've done would be to reassure people in that regard. So, look, this is a unique situation of a key piece of our economic security, not just our economic prosperity. A company acting in a particular way that I would argue was not in the kind of rational way we'd expect a company to operate in a market economy. I've got to say, I talk to CEOs, chairs of businesses every single day, and the response I've had from them to this decision is hugely supportive. I don't think people think, Laura, I'm taking dictatorial powers over the British economy.
So you're
I think
not
they
going to
recognise
end up being the captain of industry
this is
in this
about.
country.
I don't think being a captain of industry is taking control personally of industry. I think everything we're trying to, and of course, look, this has been a big story this week. Don't forget, also this week we saw that massive investment from Universal in the biggest theme park in Europe, in Bedford. We changed the support with UK Export Finance to give British businesses more support for exporting, more access to finance for SMEs with the changes we did with the British Business Bank. We changed the ZEV mandate on Monday, which makes the automotive sector more supported in the UK. There's been a few things going on, and of course, on top of that, trying to work our way through with the US around the tariffs. Every day I get up trying to do things for British business to make it better. That's not about controlling them. That's about giving them what they need to succeed.
You probably wish there was more than 24 hours in the day these days.
Right now, yeah.
Just lastly, I want to ask you about another issue it's connected, actually, to relationships between the UK and China. Because this is, as you've said, you had real concerns about whether or not this business was acting in good faith. Jingye, we know, is connected to the Chinese government. It's not just a private business. And this week, a British MP, Lib Dem Vera Hobhouse, was refused entry to Hong Kong by the authorities there. The Foreign Secretary has made clear he's deeply alarmed about that. What's the government going to do? Is that acceptable?
Absolutely. So just let me say briefly on Jingye, I want to make sure people understand that's about the specific actions of the company, that there are people who work for Chinese companies in the UK in different sectors of the economy doing good things. You know, it shouldn't be taken as a signifier of that wider relationship. But on this particular situation, yes, we are greatly concerned, and we need an account of exactly what has happened. There hasn't been an account provided at this stage. Obviously, if Vera has been denied access because she's a British MP, that would be something we take very seriously.
Okay, Jonathan Reynolds, Secretary of State, very busy man. Now, boss of British Steel, thanks very much indeed for coming in. It's great to have you with us in the studio, as ever. Thank you. Now, this is, as we've been discussing, a huge moment for the Labour government. And of course, their political opponents were watching their every move. Not just the Conservatives, but in many places these days, of course, the challenger is Nigel Farage's Reform UK. Reform are pushing for full nationalisation of the Scunthorpe plant now, pointing the finger at the government's environmental policies for putting the industry in peril. Well, as we approach the local elections in England in a few weeks' time, the party's leader, Mr Farage, is with us live this morning. It's good to have you with us in the studio. Now, you're a right-wing politician, former city trader, and here you are backing nationalisation. It's a bit strange, isn't it?
I worked for 22 years in the metals industry, and I've watched many of the firms that I used to deal with all around the United Kingdom close and disappear over the last 15 years or so. Vote blue, go green. That's what Cameron told us in 2010. Well, that's exactly what we've done. We've followed net zero policies. We've got the most expensive industrial electricity prices in the world, which gives us a massive competitive disadvantage. And it just seemed to me, at the moment Port Talbot closed down, I thought maybe the Labour government would act. They didn't. And I went to Scunthorpe on Tuesday with my colleague Richard Tice. And when I realised there was literally 3 working days left to save primary steelmaking, it seemed to me that nationalisation was the right thing to do because Jingay clearly are a bad actor.
But it's important to say to people, though, Port Talbot hasn't closed. There was a deal to keep that going. No, and in January 2023...
I'm sorry.
Let's stick on
the electric arc furnaces there will never be switched on.
Well, many people would disagree with that, but let's stick on what you're in principle backing for Scunthorpe being nationalised, because in January 2023, you go back then, and at that point you were saying, well, why should government bail it out? British steel should never have been sold to the Chinese in the first place.
That's the point. That is the point. At that moment in time, the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson were pro-China. They effectively gave a strategic industry to a foreign government, and I was vigorously opposed to it. I wanted somebody else to buy British steel, and there were other bids. The Johnson government did have other bids, but they chose China. So I wanted somebody else to step in.
Well, other people actually have told us that Jingay was the only realistic bidder. But how much would your plan to nationalise it now, how much would that actually cost the taxpayer? Because I know you've put out there, you don't know.
We don't know because we can't trust Jingay's figures. They haven't had proper audited accounts since 2021. They clearly were artificially inflating the losses because they wanted to close down steel production in Britain. This is a big strategic decision by the CCP.
So you're accusing them of lying about the numbers?
Yes, absolutely.
What's your evidence?
Lying about everything. Lying about everything. Look, I am pleased that the government have acted. I do wonder if Tice and I had not been there on Tuesday, whether they would have done, but they have, and there's a reprieve. Clearly, it's going to have to be a full nationalisation within the next couple of weeks, and that then buys us time. We need a complete rethink, not just about British steel, but about British industry. We are living through an industrial massacre where we're seeing refining, we're seeing aluminium. By the way, we no longer produce any aluminium in Britain.
Just to stick on
and so we need to have a completely different energy policy. But you've made a
serious accusation about a big Chinese company, Jingay. What is your evidence that they have been lying about the figures? And you say lying about everything. What's your actual evidence for that?
Well, you can call it intuition if you like, but why do you think that yesterday morning the trade unions acted to stop the Chinese officials even getting their cars into the plant because they feared industrial sabotage?
But hang on, you're making an accusation of lying based on your own intuition. You're making a serious accusation to a private company, to a major Chinese corporation, which of course has links to the Chinese government, because we know Chinese government companies do.
There is no such thing as any private company in China. That isn't how it works.
And we know, of course, that they are linked to the Chinese government. We know that. But I ask you again, what is your evidence for making such an accusation? Because would a serious politician say, it's my intuition that they're lying?
I am 100% certain they bought British steel to close British steel.
If you get your wish and get full nationalisation, and you see the cost run from 1 billion to 2 billion to 3 billion to 4 billion and up and up and up, would there be any upper limit at which point you go, oh, actually, this wasn't a good idea?
There's absolutely no reason why we can't manufacture steel. There's no reason why we can't manufacture aluminium, produce aluminium. There's no reason why we can't do refining. There's no reason why we can't do any of these things.
That's not the question. The question here is, you're saying to taxpayers today, I think we should absolutely right now nationalise this industry. And people might agree with that, they might disagree with it.
To save the industry.
To save the industry. You believe that to be the case.
What's left of it.
My question is there an upper limit, a cheque so big that Nigel Farage would not be willing to sign it?
We're doing this. This should be but a pause in a much bigger debate than steel. And I'm coming back to the point. We have, through the net zero obsession put into law by the last government, being carried out by this government until the last couple of weeks, we have to completely rethink energy and rethink our industrial strategy, and this is but a part of that.
OK, well, there are various reasons why the UK energy price is so high, but it is, as you suggest, a factor.
We don't produce it.
Let's move on then to other issues, because it's a while since we've had the chance to speak to you. Your friend Donald Trump is trying to push Russia to agree a ceasefire with Ukraine. Now, you said both sides should have to make concessions. What concessions should President Zelensky make?
Well, we don't know what's been said behind closed doors. I mean, look, the fact that peace is being discussed is a good thing. However, it would appear that Russia are completely uncompromising in every way. And so the war continues. At least Trump is trying for peace.
But what concessions should Zelensky have to make? Because you've said previously on the record, he should have to make concessions. You've also told people that he was rude in the Oval Office and that he should have worn a suit.
Well, look, you know, if you go and meet somebody, you know, you make your own decision how you dress and what you do. Having two of them round on him didn't look very pretty. I understand all of that. But the real point here is both sides have to make concessions. I'm not going to say what I think should be in those concessions. Clearly, at the heart of it is Crimea.
So you think that Ukraine should be willing to compromise on Crimea?
That's at the heart of it. Well, you know what? This is an attritional war. Something like 1 million battle casualties so far. Either it goes on for year after year after year, or there is a deal. But what are Russia prepared to give? And at the moment, it seems like very little.
So you think that President Zelensky in Ukraine should be willing to concede on Crimea?
I think the Russians have to make concessions too. Let's see what they are.
But that's what you're suggesting.
I'm not going to set the terms for a peace agreement. I'm pleased people are talking. OK.
Well, we'll be hearing from the Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, a bit later in the programme. I want to talk about the local elections, because I know Reform is very hopeful that this could be a big breakthrough moment for you. But we want to ask how you would run local government if you managed to capture any
The fact we're even
councils.
discussing that's remarkable, isn't it?
Well, councils have been strapped for cash for a long, long time.
I know.
We know that. And there are many issues. Let's look at a couple of them. There's already an overspend of £3 billion for children with special needs. Councils aren't able to give people the help that they need. They haven't got enough money to meet it. So if Reform was to be running any council, would you increase council tax or would you cut back services even further?
I'm really thrilled that the BBC are discussing what happens when we win county council elections, which is a pretty remarkable conversation we're having. So thank you. I've looked at the numbers. We did thousands of FOI requests to have a look at where money was being spent. I'm going to say this. We probably need a Doge for every single county council in England.
What, like
just
Elon Musk's
looking.
slashing bureau.
Yeah, I mean, quite why Lancashire County Council spent £500,000 on ergonomic chairs for their staff, I don't know. Quite why up to a third of council staff almost never come to the office, I don't know. So, by the way, I do accept that with social care, with SEND children, with less money from central government, I do accept that it's been very tough for county councils.
And actually, if you look at the numbers...
the culture hasn't changed within them.
But culture is one thing. Hard costs and hard cash is another. And if you look properly at how local councils spend their money, nearly 80% of it is on education, police, children and adults, social care. And the vast majority of it does not go on things like ergonomic chairs in the office.
There are significant...
There are serious shortages. So I'd ask you again, if you manage to take control of councils, any council around the country, on principle, would you raise council tax or would you just look to cut back services still further?
Not cutting back services, cutting back the excess and increasing the productivity of staff. One of the biggest problems in this country is the lack of productivity in our public sector. Private sector too, but public sector in particular. And the whole work from home culture, all that needs to go. There are a lot of people working for these councils earning more money than the Prime Minister and not delivering.
But if you look at how councils actually spend their money, the vast majority is not on admin costs or other places where you might be able to make efficiencies. Perhaps you might be able to do that, but the vast majority is spent on services on which our viewers rely. So I'll give it another try.
I tell you what, I'm very concerned. I mean, take potholes, for example, another massive area for local government. There's new technology on the market that can mend potholes far more cheaply, far more quickly, and yet we see councils tied in to all sorts of long-term contracts with inferior providers. The whole thing needs a fresh pair of eyes.
OK. When we last met, you told us Elon Musk made you look cool when we talked on the Saturday. Later in the day, this is what he said on social media. I don't want to, intrude on private grief, but he said that you weren't really up to the job.
Fine.
I just wondered, did he say sorry for making you look a bit daft?
We have spoken since.
Did he say sorry?
Do you know what? He has been attacking half of Trump's cabinet this week. Elon says what he wants to say at any moment in time.
OK, well, Nigel
What I will say is, though, as far as many young people are concerned in Britain, we're certainly cooler than the other parties.
But did he say anything to you about what he said on social media?
We talked about it.
What did he say?
Oh, he was just trying to encourage me in a few policy areas. Ones I wasn't prepared to go down.
OK. Well, Nigel Farage, thank you very much for coming in. It's great to have you with us live in the studio on a Sunday morning. Thank you. Well, all the parties have been busy on the campaign trail. Here they are. The Lib Dems say, though, on British Steel, they'll work constructively with the government, but they urged it to be judicious about the emergency laws that they have passed. The Green Party has a different line, though. They say steel's integral to the green transition and they are in favour of public ownership. And we'll be talking to the leaders of the Greens and the Lib Dems on our next programme on the 27th of April, because we're having a little breather over the Easter weekend. Not yet, though. We're still here live and kicking this morning. Gary, what did you make of what Jonathan Reynolds had to say? I think a lot of our viewers' ears will have pricked up when he wouldn't guarantee that actually they can keep the plant running.
He has given us Jonathan, the Labour government have given us a fighting chance for British Steel with the decisions they made yesterday, and that's got to be welcomed. This is about jobs, this is about communities, this is about national security. Absolutely done the right thing yesterday, and if they hadn't taken action, I fear that site, that plant would have been the victim of industrial vandalism.
But it is still a chance, is it? I mean, was he just being coy because there are commercial factors here, or is there a real chance that the coal doesn't reach the plant in time and the furnaces still go out?
I don't know the detail of that. I am as confident as I can be that that plant will continue operating, and that with the right policies on procurement, British Steel will survive and thrive. If we hadn't have taken the action we did yesterday, we would have been importing Chinese steel for our rail network. How are we going to build and refit our Navy ships? Are we going to import Russian steel to do that? Steel is integral to the future of the economy in this country, particularly with an agenda about building back better. And the government did a brave and right thing yesterday.
But Andy, it's interesting, isn't it, when you hear a cabinet minister talk about a company that we know will be connected to another government, Jingye, the Chinese government in this case, acting in bad faith. Do you think it was a mistake that your party, the Conservatives, allowed a Chinese company to buy the site?
Well, I think, as you said, they were probably the only buyer at the time, because we've also heard it's a very, very difficult commercial market. Just look what's happened with Tata, a very, very good partner in South Wales, and we got to a very similar conclusion. So I suspect the previous government had little choice.
But was it a mistake then? Because the choice might have been nationalisation. It might have been unthinkable for a Conservative government to do that, but perhaps that would have been a better choice.
I'm sure at the beginning there was good faith in it. But can I just move the conversation on? Because we've had a fascinating debate about the detail of that particular decision. But when you were talking, I find myself thinking, well, come on, in what context does this sit about the government's total industrial policy, indeed business policy? And we heard the business secretary talk about what he'd done here, but you have to say there have been lots of other decisions that have not been supportive to business. And what I'm really crying out for as we look for this elusive growth is what is the overall industrial strategy, so we see where this fits in a much, much bigger picture.
And do you think that that might come sooner, Stephanie? And Andy, I want to talk in a second about the huge auto industry and cars, all those cars made in the West Midlands that we slapped with 25% extra tariffs. But Stephanie, we were told last weekend elements of the industrial strategy might be speeded up. The government was going to, they always say further, faster, further, faster. But from what you see, are they actually really gripping this moment?
I think that obviously it was striking, the Prime Minister's speech last weekend. I have to say, part of me is thinking, if you look at where the UK is now, particularly having had left the European Union, having positioned itself in a certain way over all these years, we are the last country that should be rushing to say that globalisation is dead. I think we should be fighting a bit harder for a sort of an open trading system. Yes, we have to rethink some of the assumptions that were made, that we were talking about earlier, about ownership, about needing to focus on certain industries. But I think it has to be part of a still very pro-trade, pro-openness agenda, because we're a country that's going to lose most from a world in which we regionalise and everything is in blocks. And I think one of the things of seizing the opportunity, yes, they should be bringing forward some of the industrial strategy that was supposed to be coming in the summer and maybe thinking more realistically about that. But also, sorry to go back to it, being more ambitious when it comes to Europe. Because I think when you're looking at the kind of uncertainty we're seeing, that seems to me a more obvious place to go and to be looking for than an extremely unreliable partner in the form of Donald Trump.
But people in the Labour movement and union leaders like you, Gary, actually you might be, quite chipper that common ownership seems to be back in fashion. Is this a new era or is it more of the old?
Globalisation as we knew it is dead.
Really?
The
You
Chancellor,
sure about that?
Absolutely, it is. And we are not anti-trade. We will need a global recovery plan post what's been happening with Trump. The real world consequences will be felt in the months ahead with job losses. But we have to understand globalisation as we knew it was gamed by the Chinese. And it was open globalisation, but it wasn't inclusive. It was a free-for-all. It wasn't fair. And we need different trading relationships with the world, including Europe. I agree with that. I want to see government come forward with that industrial plan as an emergency, and I want to see a resetting of global relationships and a global recovery plan that will involve many countries around the world.
Steph, briefly, and then I want to talk
Well, I just would say that, that we've seen political forces, you just had an interview with one of them, that benefit a lot from that critique. What we haven't seen, and I don't think we have seen from Reform yet, is a sort of joined up analysis of what you were trying to press Nigel Farage on this, what it actually means. You can't just take control of different things and talk about aluminium and talk about steel. It has to be part of something bigger.
Andy, in terms of the motor industry, the UK's biggest export to the US, still expecting 25% tariffs on top. Gary's just predicted job losses in the coming months. I mean, is that your concern for the Midlands?
Of course it's my concern. I mean, had we been having this conversation before Thursday, the big subject would have been tariffs. And it is good that the US president has stepped back from the worst. But let's be blunt, we still face 25% tariffs plus the 10%, I think, on the luxury cars that we do a really good job at exporting. So in that sense, we've had great success. And so if I could persuade the business secretary of one thing this morning, it would be to bring forward that negotiation and get that tariff reduced, because jobs, particularly in the West Midlands, depend on this outcome.
But when the Conservatives were in charge, and even when Boris Johnson had that visible alignment on some things with Donald Trump, you didn't manage to get a trade deal either. So how do you think that a Labour government's going to be able to get some kind of trade arrangement in a hurry?
Well, we certainly didn't face the tariff situation, and actually there's been huge success of the car industry over the last few years, actually. So that isn't quite fair. But now the current Prime Minister says that he has this relationship. We look to be getting a better deal than others at the beginning of the week. That is no longer true. So we want to see the fruits of that relationship.
And we're about to talk to Jonathan Reynolds' opposite number, Andrew Griffith. But before we do, I just want to ask you, having heard Nigel Farage, having seen probably earlier this week Cammy Badenoch suggest that Reform councillors and Conservative councillors could potentially work together in coalition on the ground. How do you feel about that as a prominent Conservative?
Well, clearly it's not my decision in any way, but my feeling on it is that we should have nothing to do with alliances with them, just as Kemi, to be fair, has said about the national situation. We've got to put in front of voters the choice. A moderate centre-right Conservative party against a populist party that I think you heard this morning did not actually have a policy answer to any of the big questions. OK,
well, let's see what Andrew Griffiths has to say about that. And of course, remember, we want to know what you think. We always do. You know the drill. Email us at kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're a social media inclined type of person, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura K. All the contacts and numbers are there for you. I promise one day I will learn the WhatsApp number off by heart, and we will try and share some of the conversation a bit later in the show, or as ever, you can sign up for our Thursday newsletter. Well, as we've been discussing, Labour's not the first government to deal with the many ups and downs and ups of the steel industry. In office, the Conservatives were trying to broker a deal with Jinye, the owners of the Scunthorpe plant, but it didn't happen in time before the general election, and Andrew Griffith, as Shadow Business Secretary, is here. Just before we get into that, would you respond to Andy Street saying you should have nothing to do with reform, whether that's at local council level or national level?
Well, if people want a Conservative-led council, and I think they should because they run services better, rates are lower, then they've got to vote Conservative. There's always been, after elections, for local councillors themselves to disport how they're going to run the local council. That won't be needed if people vote Conservative. But if that is needed, then historically people have done deals on a local council level with all sorts of groups. I think the Liberal Dems are quite extremist. Whenever they get into council, they want 4-day weeks and veganism.
But it's a bit different.
But no one should take that off the table, because those are decisions for local councillors to decide it shouldn't get there because people can vote Conservative.
Oh, well, we'll see what our viewers think about you saying that the Lib Dems are all vegan or suggesting that that's
Not all
the
of them,
case.
but, too many.
But it's interesting, though. Andy Street takes a different tack on this, and he was a successful Conservative local leader for many years, and he's saying you should not have anything to do with them, that reform should be beyond the pale. So why then is your leader, Kemi Badenoch, saying there might be various coalitions and that's OK?
Look, I think Kemi's reflecting the reality that we have local democracy, and if people stand for local council and they want to do the best for their communities, then they will have to, in the light of how people have voted, work out what the right combination is. And I think
it's a bit defeatist to say that before the votes have taken place.
Well, no, I'm talking about an artefact of history. I've also said, Laura, and I'll say it again, if people want a well-run Conservative council with low council tax, then they should vote Conservative, and this will be a moot point.
OK, well, plenty of people are campaigning hard for the local elections. We just heard you say the same. Was it a mistake for the Conservatives to allow Jinye to take over British Steel in the first place?
Well, there's clearly been a significant breakdown in the relationship, but casting your mind back to 2019, it was the only deal on the table. The business was in liquidation. The unions, local members of Parliament, British Steel themselves wanted that deal. It was the only deal in town, and it did lead to significant investment, modernisation, the continued operation for 5 years. I don't know what the breakdown has been under this government. There were talks ongoing when we were last in office about how you would continue to modernise and transition that business.
But you didn't get a deal done. And some Conservatives, like your former leader, Ian Duncan-Smith, has been very plain and public, has said it was a mistake to sell this business to the Chinese. So was it?
Well, the world has changed, and it's a mistake right now, given what we've learned. And remember, the deal to Jinye was before the Chinese repealed the basic law in Hong Kong as well, so it's a different world that we're in.
There was still plenty of concerns about how China operated in 2019. It wasn't a completely different universe.
I think those concerns, you're not wrong, but I think those concerns are heightened now. And so it's certainly a mistake for the government, particularly in its energy policy, to be going headlong into more dependency on the Chinese. Almost every solar panel is made in China. Almost every electric battery imported into our cars is made in China. And so we've all got to learn from this. It's been a chaotic week. The government could have seen this coming earlier. We supported yesterday because it was the least worst option on the table, but it is a botched nationalisation, and they will be back.
But would you clamp down on other kinds of Chinese exports then? Would you say, no, we should not be importing Chinese solar panels, as you suggested? We should not be importing batteries for electric cars from China? Is that what you're saying?
Look, I think we've all learned over the last few years. We've both learnt in terms of some of the attitudes that we've seen from China. It was only a week ago that Labour voted to repeal a clause that we'd put forward to prevent slave labour being used in the supply chain. We've got to be more sensible about long-term resilience and about our security, and pushing headlong into an energy policy that breeds more dependency on China, even though I'm a free trade Excuse me, even though I support free trade, we've got to have a growth plan. This country depends upon exports. At the same time, we've got to be clear-eyed about the strategic implications of pursuing policies without understanding the implications.
And those environmental policies and levies, many of them were put in place under the previous Conservative government. But I just want to ask you, if it comes to it and the option is full nationalisation or this plant going under, would the Conservatives back full nationalisation of
I think
British
we're
Steel?
already there. I think if you look at the bill that was passed yesterday, the Secretary of State, who was here earlier, will be telling people to shovel coke into ovens. The Chancellor will be paying the bills for suppliers, paying the bills for workers.
But that's a different thing, because Jinye is still the shareholder.
Still the shareholder.
Company. So if it comes to full nationalisation...
We've got the worst of all worlds. So yes, Laura.
But you would back nationalisation of this industry?
I think we're already there in substance. And if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. This business has been nationalised. The government should have brought forward a bill yesterday that covered issues about ownership, the liability, the decommissioning. We can't have a position where British pensioners have lost their winter fuel allowance, people are losing their disability benefit in order to pay for and compensate a Chinese owner. It is a botched nationalisation. If the government's going to have to bring forward a bill to put it into full public ownership, and then if they can, bring in an international investor, bring in some expert management to restructure this business, as was our intention going forward. OK, well, we will see what happens. It will be fascinating to see it. Andrew Griffith, thank you very much indeed for coming in. It's great to have you with us in the studio again. Thank you very much indeed. Well,
in 2025, it feels like everything is connected. One of the reasons the steel industry has struggled so much is the cost of energy. And one of the reasons for those sky-high prices has been the war in Ukraine. President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, met Vladimir Putin on Friday, the Americans demanding that Russia get moving towards a ceasefire. Just as that meeting was taking place, we sat down with the Russian ambassador here. So are there really any signs that Putin is interested in peace?
What has been suggested is a pause, a ceasefire. It's a good idea, and we are not against it. We stand for it. However, if you would like to have it seriously, then you need to carefully prepare it, really. Otherwise, if it will be broken, and a day after announcement the ceasefire will cease to exist, it will be extremely difficult to reestablish it.
But the Americans are suggesting, and Ukraine has agreed to this, an immediate ceasefire and then detailed negotiations. And Donald Trump has said publicly, and these are his words, not mine, I don't wish to offend anyone, but he has said he is very angry, even pissed off, that Russia hasn't signed up. So the question is still why? Because America wants a pause in the fighting. Ukraine has agreed to have a pause in the fighting, and Russia won't say yes. And you continue to attack.
If you believe that we will run up as soon as American is saying something, this is will be the case. We have our vital priorities and our vital interests in this conflict, and they should be not only taken into account, they should be implemented. And Americans are very well aware of our position. We do not want a ceasefire for just to make it spectacular gesture, to show it publicly or for the media. We need full-scale settlement once and forever.
But you were the aggressor. Russia carried out an illegal invasion of Ukraine, and you are saying you won't stop the fighting until you get what you want.
Of course, yes, we do. We has made every effort on diplomatic field, absolutely every, until we did understand. Do you expect people
to believe that? Let me just say what is going on right now. But the point is that Russia is continuing brutal and gruesome attacks that are taking the lives of Ukrainian civilians, and there is evidence that you are amassing troops, conscripting thousands of new soldiers to keep fighting this war. That's not the behaviour of a country that wants to engage seriously in a peace process. You say you have been trying to engage seriously in the diplomacy. As President Trump's envoy right now is sitting down with Vladimir Putin, what is Russia's message to America, who is visibly losing patience with this? You have Donald Trump telling you, get moving, this is a terrible war.
We are glad that Americans are listening to our reasons, concerns, root causes, and all of that. We understand that they are now seriously about our motives as well.
Do you think America's your ally?
Oh, no, I don't think so. This is very far. It is. You would like this transition? No. Your question is about whether this transition from total distrust to alignment is possible in 2 months. My answer would be no. We have too many disagreements, but we are working on these disagreements step by step in different areas, and happily, if we will move this way and we will not hurry up too much in order to produce a picture for general public. So this is not the case.
But while the diplomatic process grinds on, of course, people on both sides, including your own people, are dying as a result of this conflict. Now, the latest defence intelligence from the British Ministry of Defence tells us that around 250,000 Russians have now been killed in this conflict. That's the highest number since the Second World War. For how long will you continue to preside over that kind of loss of life?
This is not the first time we have this discussion. The real ciphers are known only to our general staff, and not, of course, to the British general staff.
The question is the same. The latest Western intelligence suggests around 250,000 people, the population of a small city, have lost their lives, and that casualties are approaching nearly 1 million. Whether you want to quibble with the numbers or not, the point is the same. For how long are you prepared to carry on with this conflict
Setting
when
aside,
thousands upon thousands of people on
Laura,
both sides are losing their lives?
Setting aside the question of the victims, number of victims on both sides, let it be Ukrainians, we are also not happy at all with that is happening. We are not happy that losses are continuous. Of course, there is a demand also in our country that war should stop anyway, but we have to achieve our goals because, as I have said, we have vital. This for us is a question of survival of our sovereignty, of whether we have keep our sovereignty or will be subordinated to the Western desires and to the Western interests in our country.
This conflict is not about your sovereignty.
It is about
It's about the sovereignty of Ukraine, which was an independent country which was invaded by Russia.
Okay, you also have to read what my president is saying, what the Minister of Foreign Affairs is saying. They speaking about that. This is about sovereignty of Russia as well, very much.
Do you fear there will be a moment when the Russian people hear the truth about the real costs of this war, the cost they're living with in terms of the economy being in terrible, terrible trouble in your country, and the real cost of the sheer number of lives being lost? Do you fear there'll be a reckoning for Russia's leaders when that becomes clear? Because you can fool yourself, you can try to fool people at home with propaganda that it's not actually going as badly as it is. But do you fear there'll be a reckoning?
No, I wouldn't say that we're trying to fool people with propaganda because it is clear that life in Russia is absolutely normal. Please go and see yourself. Yeah, we have a big GDP is 4% for 2 years. Life did not change at all. You can see it with your eyes.
You have built an economy based on a conflict in which thousands upon thousands of your own countrymen have lost their lives. The fact is, at the beginning of this conflict, you believed you could be in Kyiv in a couple of days. You're not winning this war. And in fact, you succeeded in pushing European allies together. Even as we speak today, there are 50 countries gathering, discussing, giving more money, more support, military aid to Ukraine, planning a force potentially of 30,000 to protect a peace if ever there is a peace deal. Yes. What do you say to that?
Any NATO contingent on Ukrainian soil, this is not acceptable in either would it be in a treaty or in the other hand. In any way, they will have to, overall framework, we will have to agree together and our consent will be needed for that.
When we last spoke 6 months ago, you said that the UK was waging an aggressive war against your country, against Russia. But new British intelligence has reported that there is what's called grey warfare, grey zone warfare, targeting underwater. Your country has put Russian sensors trying to track British nuclear submarines. Those are serious accusations, and that's an act of genuine hostility against the United Kingdom. Do you deny that?
I'm not going to deny it, but I wonder whether we really have an interest in following old British submarine with very old, outdated nuclear warheads. It is absolutely well known. Everything is known, and all these threats are extremely exaggerated. They have taken out of the blue.
But you're not denying it. You're not denying it.
No, I do. What I deny that I'm denying existence of threat for the United Kingdom. This threat has been invented. Absolutely, there is no threat at all from Russia to the UK. But if UK would like to invent threat, so threats, different threats, it is up to you.
I think our viewers will know very well what happened in Salisbury when Russian agents poisoned people on the streets of the UK, and people will remember very well what happened to Litvinenko here in the United Kingdom. When will anyone see any credible evidence that Russia actually wants peace, desires peace, might behave in a way that brings peace to the people of Ukraine and your own people?
Yeah. As I have said, we entered a political process. A political process has started. It is pretty intensive, I will say. It goes in different lines, not on the surface of media or general knowledge. But sooner or later, this peace process will bring us to a result out.
Okay. Ambassador, thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sooner or later, there'll be peace. Well, Stephanie, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine is yet another thing, isn't it, that stirs up trouble for the economy?
Yeah, and I think, the President Trump, as with so many things, wanted a quick deal, and then he wanted other Europeans to take responsibility for everything that happens after that. Vladimir Putin's clearly not on the quick deal bit of the programme. But I do think there's a lot of things changing on the ground, which the so-called, the coalition of the willing has to be putting a machinery in place now to replace the support that was given to Ukraine in the last few years. Because it wasn't widely noticed last week, but the Pentagon announced, for example, at the beginning of last week, it was going to start removing personnel from the base in Poland, which has been the main conduit for support to Ukraine. So the machinery of the past support is disappearing before our eyes, and it is not clear what happens next.
Andy, it does feel like piece by piece, almost everywhere, Trump is just changing the dials, twiddling everything around.
It does, and I listened to that and I thought it doesn't change my view one bit that the European alliance, plus our friends in Canada, Japan, Australia, there is a world alliance that goes beyond the US. That's one of the things we must keep drawing out from all the different things. We have got to be absolutely robust, because I listen to that and you think they only understand negotiating from a position of strength, and the European alliance has got to bring that about.
And, the war in Ukraine is one of the things that caused that energy shock, Gary. And we've talked a lot about energy costs and that impact it has on the economy. But for your members and for the kind of industries that you represent, how much is the factor, the price of energy, the huge pressure? Because you can see from a political point of view, that's where Reform is going. They're pushing on the price of energy. That's also where the Conservatives are going. They're talking about the cost of net zero.
In terms of Reform, what you've heard this morning is soft on Russia, soft on the invasion of Ukraine. They are not on the side of trade unionists and working people. Pro-privatisation of the health service, voted against the employment rights bill. They are not on our side by any stretch of the imagination, and they aren't on the side of right in Ukraine either. In terms of the Tories, to hear a Tory shadow minister talk about resilience, our Navy was left in dry dock under the Tories. They closed gas storage. Under Cameron and Osborne, they were going to build a nuclear power station in Essex with Chinese labour. So nobody's going to take lectures from the Tories on resilience. We need an industrial policy brought forward in the next few weeks. It needs to complement the defence industrial strategy. We need a multilateral agreement about restoring the global economy. And actually Labour could do well to employ thousands of apprentices in trades like electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters and welders, because these are the jobs of the future.
Are you campaigning in the local elections as well? Andy, if you want to respond to that just as we come to a close. I mean, he says basically the Tories have left us naked and having difficulty dealing with all of these things.
Well, you've seen there are global changes coming about there, but actually I don't think that is fair at all. There was the most robust response possible from the Conservative government over the international issues. I agree with Gary entirely about what we heard from Nigel Farage. That was soft on Russia. The Conservative government could never have been described to be soft on Russia, so it is not accurate.
OK, well, it does seem in every week 2025 we have been talking about everything, everywhere, everything does seem to be linked. Stephanie, do you think that this moment is really one of these, you can't change anything without something else happening on the other side?
I mean, we have, I guess the shock that's come from the last few weeks, or the thing that people are trying to get used to, is we were talking about a multi-level crisis in the global economy, massive challenges like carbon transition, geopolitical fracturing, before Donald Trump announced his tariffs and sort of set a bomb into the global trading system. So we just have, it's trying to find the brain space for politicians to address everything at once, and indeed for you, I think it must be pretty tough.
Well, I was going to say thank you for sharing your brains with us this morning. I'm not sure what's left in mine after the last few weeks, but thank you very much indeed to our trio at the desk this morning, and thank you to all of our guests. Thank you to you, of course, most of all, for spending your Sunday morning with us on yet another important weekend when the government's taking control of British Steel, and the track seems to be on the way to nationalisation. But the first job that is not guaranteed to succeed is literally to keep the fires burning. And the Business Secretary this morning would not confirm to us that the coal would arrive in time to keep the furnaces going. The next few days could be critical. We are off for Easter next weekend, so I'll wish you a happy one. But I'll be with Paddy on Sunday's newscast a bit later, and we'll be talking to Wera Hobhouse, the MP who was held in Hong Kong. So there'll be plenty to keep you occupied on BBC Sounds and iPlayer, of course. And I'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday, the 27th, at the same time, at the same place.